The notification came through at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Marcus Donovan, 42, a marine engineering consultant who'd spent the last 18 years working with coastal development projects across 3 continents, stared at the email on his phone with mounting disbelief. Another citation, the third one this month. This time, the Harborview Estates HOA was threatening to have his boat trailer removed from his own driveway and was demanding he cease all unauthorized use of the community marina access. 3 months of this nonsense. 3 months of dealing with Patricia Wellington, the newly elected HOA president who seemed to believe she owned the entire waterfront. But what Patricia didn't know, what she was about to discover the hard way, was that Marcus didn't just use the marina. He owned the lease. And today, everything was about to change. Before we dive into how Marcus turned the tables on an HOA president who bit off way more than she could chew, if you love stories where entitled people finally meet their match and justice is served with surgical precision, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a reasonable man too far, the confrontation where power shifted completely, and the resolution where an entire HOA board learned a lesson they'd never forget. Picture a man who'd spent years negotiating waterfront access rights across multiple countries, watching his peaceful retirement location turn into a battlefield because one person decided rules didn't apply to them. The citations piled up, each more absurd than the last. The peaceful attempts to resolve things met with mockery and threats. The moment when Marcus realized the HOA president had no idea who she was actually dealing with, or what legal ground she was standing on, which turned out to be his legal ground. Now imagine the confrontation itself. The emergency HOA meeting Patricia called, expecting to humiliate Marcus in front of the entire community. The documents Marcus brought with him. The moment her face changed from smug satisfaction to absolute horror when she realized what she'd done. The board members' reactions when they understood the full scope of the situation. And finally, the resolution. How Patricia's attempt to consolidate power became the very thing that ended her reign. The legal consequences that unfolded. The changes that swept through the HOA. And how Marcus, who'd only wanted to launch his boat in peace, ended up saving an entire community from years of tyranny. Here's exactly how it happened. Marcus Donovan had purchased his waterfront property in Harborview Estates 2 years ago, specifically because it offered everything a semi-retired marine engineer could want. At 42, after nearly 2 decades consulting on marina construction, port development, and waterfront infrastructure projects from Singapore to Stockholm, he'd finally found a place where he could maintain his consulting business remotely while actually enjoying the water he'd spent his career working around. The 3-bedroom cottage sat on a double lot with direct sight lines to the community marina, a shared facility that served the 28 homes in the gated waterfront development. Marcus kept his modest 23-foot center console there, nothing flashy, just a reliable boat for fishing and occasional island runs. He was quiet, friendly with neighbors, and paid his HOA dues on time every month without complaint. The trouble started exactly 2 weeks after Patricia Wellington became HOA president. Marcus returned from a morning fishing trip on a Wednesday in early September to find a fluorescent orange citation taped to his garage door. The notice, printed on official HOA letterhead, informed him that his boat trailer, which he'd parked in his own driveway for the past 2 years, was in violation of Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA covenants regarding visual obstruction and property value degradation. He had 72 hours to remove it or face a $50 daily fine. Marcus read it twice, confused. His trailer sat behind his truck, barely visible from the street, and the previous HOA board had explicitly approved it during his initial move-in inspection. He'd kept the paperwork. Still, Marcus being Marcus, he assumed this was some kind of administrative mix-up. He drafted a polite email to Patricia, attached the approval documentation, and explained the situation. He received no response. 2 weeks later, Marcus launched his boat at dawn for a weekend trip to the Barrier Islands. He'd invited his brother and nephew down from Charleston, a rare visit he'd been planning for months. They'd loaded fishing gear, camping equipment, and enough provisions for 3 days. But when Marcus backed his truck and trailer down to the Marina launch ramp at 5:30 a.m., he found a chain locked across the access point. A new sign, professionally made, declared, "Marina access, resident permit required. Unauthorized use will result in towing and legal action." Marcus stared at it in disbelief. Resident permit? He was a resident. He'd been using this launch ramp twice a week for 2 years. His brother and nephew sat in the truck, confused, as Marcus called the security gate. The guard, apologetic, explained that Patricia had implemented the new system 3 days ago. All residents needed to apply for permits through her directly. She was the only one who could issue them. The process took up to 2 weeks for review. Marcus's weekend was ruined. His family went home disappointed. And when Marcus sent another email, this one less polite, demanding an explanation, Patricia responded within minutes. "Perhaps if you'd followed the rules regarding your trailer, you'd have been informed of policy changes. Consider this a learning opportunity." The third incident happened 4 weeks later and crossed a line Marcus hadn't even known existed. He'd spent a Saturday afternoon doing maintenance on his boat at his assigned marina slip, changing spark plugs, checking fuel lines, the routine stuff any boat owner does. He'd worked quietly for 3 hours, cleaned up meticulously, and headed home around 6 p.m. The next morning, he found another citation, this one far more serious. Patricia alleged he'd been conducting unauthorized commercial marine repair services at the community marina and operating an unlicensed marine business from HOA property. The fine, $500, the threat. Immediate revocation of his marina slip access if he didn't pay within 10 days. Marcus felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about rules or property values. This was personal. Patricia was harassing him, and she was doing it because she could, or because she thought she could. Marcus had tried reason. He'd called Patricia directly, only to have her inform him, her voice dripping with condescension, that perhaps Harborview Estates wasn't the right fit for someone who couldn't follow simple community guidelines. He'd attended an HOA meeting to address the board, only to have Patricia cut him off after 30 seconds, citing time limitations before spending 15 minutes discussing the annual holiday decoration contest. He'd even approached other board members privately, but they seemed afraid of Patricia, unwilling to challenge her growing list of arbitrary rules and selective enforcement. The woman had been president for 3 months and had already alienated half the neighborhood. But Marcus was different. Marcus wasn't intimidated. He stopped trying to reason with her. Instead, Marcus did what he'd done for 18 years when facing complex property and access disputes. He researched. He spent 2 weeks pulling county records, reviewing historical property surveys, examining the original development agreements from when Harborview Estates was constructed in 2008. He requested documentation from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection regarding waterfront access permits. He reviewed every single HOA covenant, bylaw, and amendment filed since the community's inception, and what he found made him smile for the first time in weeks. Patricia Wellington had made a catastrophic mistake. She'd assumed the HOA owned the marina. They didn't. Marcus did. More specifically, Marcus held the master lease on the entire waterfront access facility, a detail buried in the property records because the original developer had structured it that way for tax purposes. When Marcus bought his property, he'd inherited that lease agreement as part of the purchase. The HOA had a subordinate access agreement that required the leaseholder's approval for any policy changes affecting marina operations. Patricia had implemented her permit system, her access restrictions, and her citations without any legal authority whatsoever. She'd been issuing rules for a facility she didn't control. And if Marcus chose to enforce the lease terms, he could revoke the HOA's access agreement entirely. Legally, he could shut down the marina for every single resident except himself. Marcus sat at his kitchen table on a Thursday evening in late November, a neat stack of documents beside his laptop, and considered his options. He wasn't vindictive by nature. He'd never wanted this kind of conflict. But Patricia had humiliated him, cost him time with his family, and was now financially threatening him with baseless citations. More importantly, she was doing the same thing to other residents. He'd learned she'd cited 6 other homeowners in the past month alone for equally absurd violations. Someone needed to stop her. And Marcus had just realized he was the only one who could. If Patricia wanted to play legal games with community property, Marcus would show her what real property law looked like. He began preparing his documents. And on Monday morning, when he received yet another citation, this one threatening legal action if he didn't cease his pattern of willful noncompliance, Marcus decided it was time for an emergency HOA meeting. But this time, he'd be the one calling it. The emergency meeting convened at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in the Harborview Estates Community Clubhouse. Patricia had scheduled it herself after Marcus formally requested it in writing, citing urgent matters regarding marina access and HOA authority. She'd sent a smug email to all residents announcing the meeting, noting that certain homeowners' continued refusal to respect community standards has necessitated formal action. Patricia clearly expected this to be Marcus's public humiliation. She'd even arranged the chairs in rows facing a head table where she sat with the 4 other board members: Ted Morrison, the vice president; Helen Zhang, the treasurer; Robert Carr, the secretary; and Lisa Matthews, a member at large. All of them looked uncomfortable. Patricia looked triumphant. Marcus arrived at 6:55 p.m. carrying a leather document folder and a laptop bag. 23 residents had shown up, nearly every household in the community, an unprecedented turnout. People were curious. Some were supportive of Marcus, having dealt with Patricia's increasingly authoritarian approach themselves. Others just wanted to see what happened next. Marcus took a seat in the front row, directly facing Patricia, and waited. He looked calm, too calm. Patricia didn't seem to notice. "This meeting is called to order," Patricia announced at 7:02 p.m., tapping her gavel twice on the table. "We're here to address Mr. Donovan's repeated violations of community standards and his refusal to comply with lawful HOA directives. Mr. Donovan, you requested this meeting. I assume you're prepared to explain your actions and discuss how you plan to come into compliance." Her tone was patronizing, the kind reserved for scolding children. Marcus stood slowly, opened his folder, and smiled. "Actually, Patricia, I called this meeting to discuss your violations, specifically your complete lack of authority to implement any of the marina policies you've been enforcing for the past 3 months." The room went silent. Patricia's expression flickered, just for a second, before settling back into condescension. "Excuse me, I'm the HOA president, Mr. Donovan. I have full authority to—" "You have authority over HOA property," Marcus interrupted quietly. "The marina isn't HOA property. I own it." He pulled a document from his folder and held it up. "This is the master lease agreement for the Harborview Estates waterfront access facility, filed with Beaufort County on March 12, 2008. The original developer, Coastal Properties LLC, structured the marina as a separate leasehold to maintain flexibility for future development. When the developer sold the remaining units, the master lease transferred to the property owners of lots 15 and 16, which were combined into a single parcel. My parcel. I've held this lease for 2 years. The HOA has a subordinate access agreement that explicitly requires the leaseholder's written approval for any operational changes to the facility." Patricia's face had gone pale. You can't. The HOA manages the marina, we always have." "You manage it under my lease," Marcus continued, his voice still calm but gaining an edge. "Which means every permit requirement you implemented, every access restriction, every citation you issued, all of it was done without legal authority. You've been issuing rules for a facility you don't control." He pulled out another document. "This is Section 4.2 of your Subordinate Access Agreement. It states clearly, no operational policy changes may be implemented without written consent of the master leaseholder. Did you get my written consent, Patricia?" She didn't answer. The board members were now staring at her with growing alarm. Ted Morrison leaned forward. "Patricia, did you review the lease documents before implementing the permit system?" The marina has always been HOA property," Patricia stammered. "The previous board managed it, I assumed." "You assumed wrong," Marcus said. He wasn't shouting, he didn't need to. "And because you assumed, you've now placed this entire HOA in potential legal jeopardy." He pulled out more papers, setting them on the table in front of Patricia one by one. "These are the citations you issued to me over the past 3 months. Each one references violations that you have no authority to enforce. This is harassment, Patricia, and it's documented. He produced another document. This is the email where you told me Harborview isn't the right fit for me. That's discriminatory behavior under Florida housing law. Another paper. These are the citations you issued to Margaret Chen for her kayak rack, to David Torres for his dock box, to the Hendersons for their floating dock bumpers, all marina-related citations that required my approval under the lease terms. None of you bothered to get it. Helen Zhang, the treasurer, had her head in her hands. Robert Carr looked like he might be sick. Patricia's expression had progressed from pale to gray. I didn't know about any lease," she whispered. "You didn't check," Marcus corrected. "You were elected president 3 months ago, and instead of reviewing the community's legal agreements and property documents, you immediately started implementing new rules and citing residents. You didn't do your due diligence, and now we're here." He turned to address the full room. "For everyone's information, the Marina lease is paid through my HOA dues, which everyone contributes to. The lease costs approximately $48,000 per year. The HOA's subordinate access agreement is contingent on maintaining good faith cooperation with the leaseholder. Patricia's actions over the past 3 months constitute a breach of that good faith requirement." A resident in the third row raised her hand. "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus turned back to Patricia. "It means I have the legal right to terminate the HOA's access agreement and revoke marina privileges for all residents except myself. I could shut down the entire marina, tomorrow if I wanted to." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Patricia gripped the edge of the table. "You wouldn't. You can't do that. People bought their homes for marina access." "I could," Marcus said simply. "Under the lease terms, I absolutely could. The question is, will I?" He let that hang in the air for a long moment. The room had gone completely silent. Every eye was on him. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm willing to maintain the current access agreement on one condition. Patricia Wellington resigns as HOA president immediately, and the board implements a mandatory review process for any future policy changes affecting shared facilities. Additionally, all citations issued to all residents over the past 3 months are voided, and the HOA issues a formal apology for the harassment." Ted Morrison stood up. That's reasonable, Marcus, more than reasonable." He turned to Patricia. "Patricia, you need to resign." "I won't," Patricia said, but her voice had no conviction. "I was elected. You can't force me out." Marcus pulled out one final document. "Actually, according to Article 12, Section 5 of your own bylaws, a board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of homeowners if they've acted in a manner detrimental to the community's interests or contrary to established legal agreements. I've already collected the signatures." He held up a petition. 21 households signed. That's 75% of the community. You're done, Patricia." Patricia Wellington stared at the petition, at the room full of neighbors who turned against her, at the board members who wouldn't meet her eyes. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd. You're all making a huge mistake." She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "You think you've won something here, Donovan? You'll regret this." Marcus met her eyes. "I already regret it, Patricia. I regret that you forced me to spend weeks researching property law and collecting signatures just to launch my boat in peace. I regret that you turned a nice community into a hostile environment. I regret that you made enemies of people who just wanted to live here quietly. But I don't regret standing up to you, not for a second." Patricia left without another word. The door closed behind her. The room stayed silent for a moment before Ted Morrison cleared his throat. "All in favor of accepting Patricia's resignation and voiding all citations issued under her administration?" Every hand went up. Marcus closed his folder and smiled for the first time in months. The emergency board meeting continued for another 90 minutes after Patricia's departure, but the tone had shifted completely. Ted Morrison, assuming temporary leadership, spent the first 20 minutes apologizing to Marcus and the other residents who'd been cited. Helen Zhang reviewed the HOA's finances and discovered that Patricia had been planning to use citation revenue to fund a personal project, new landscaping around her own property, without board approval. Robert Carr found emails showing Patricia had ignored multiple complaints about her behavior, filing them in a folder labeled Chronic Complainers. The board was horrified. What they'd thought was strong leadership had been autocratic overreach with potentially criminal elements. Marcus spent another hour working with the board to establish a new policy review process. Any future changes affecting shared facilities would require a 30-day comment period, a majority board vote, and for marina-specific issues, Marcus's written approval as leaseholder. It was a reasonable system, one that protected both the HOA's interests and Marcus's property rights. Helen Zhang proposed formally recognizing Marcus's contribution to the community by nomming him as a permanent marina oversight advisor, a non-board position that would give him direct input on waterfront matters. Marcus accepted. By 9:30 p.m., when the meeting finally adjourned, Harborview Estates had the beginnings of a functional, transparent governance system. But Patricia wasn't done fighting. 3 days later, Marcus received a certified letter from an attorney representing Patricia Wellington. The letter accused Marcus of intimidation, harassment, and conspiracy to unlawfully remove an elected official. It demanded Marcus issue a public apology, pay Patricia $15,000 in damages for emotional distress and reputational harm, and resign from any HOA involvement. The letter threatened a lawsuit if Marcus didn't comply within 10 days. Marcus read it once, laughed, and forwarded it to his own attorney, a real estate specialist he'd worked with on commercial marina projects for years. The response letter, sent 5 days later, was a masterpiece of legal precision. It detailed every violation Patricia had committed, included time-stamped documentation of her harassment, cited the specific Florida statutes she'd violated regarding HOA authority and property access, and concluded with a counter-threat. If Patricia pursued legal action, Marcus would file a countersuit for harassment, defamation, and abuse of authority, seeking actual damages for the lost family trip, time spent researching legal remedies, and stress-related harm. The letter also noted that Marcus had recordings of Patricia's "you'll regret this" comment, which could be construed as a threat. Patricia's attorney withdrew the threat 2 days later. The HOA held new elections 4 weeks after Patricia's resignation. Ted Morrison ran for president on a platform of transparency and ran unopposed. He won unanimously. One of his first acts was formally voiding every citation Patricia had issued and refunding any fines residents had paid under duress. Margaret Chen got her kayak rack citation rescinded. David Torr's dock box fee was refunded with interest. The Hendersons received an apology letter signed by the entire board. Marcus waived his $50 daily trailer fine, which had accumulated to over $3,000 on paper, and submitted a new marina operations proposal that gave all residents equal access with no permit requirements beyond basic safety guidelines. The real surprise came during the January board meeting, 2 months after Patricia's departure. Helen Zhang was reviewing the HOA's financial statements when she discovered something that made her go pale. Patricia had secretly negotiated a contract with a private marina management company, Coastal Elite Properties, to take over operations of the Harborview Marina. The contract, which Patricia had signed without board approval, would have transferred all maintenance responsibilities, slip assignments, and access control to the private company in exchange for 40% of all marina-related fees. The company was owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. If the contract had gone through, residents would have been charged monthly slip fees, launch fees, and parking fees on a facility they'd been using for free under Marcus's lease. The total cost to residents would have been approximately $2,000 per household per year. Patricia had planned to implement it in February, right after the busy holiday season when people were less likely to notice. Marcus reviewed the unsigned contract. Patricia had never filed it officially, clearly waiting for the right moment, and felt genuinely angry for the first time since the confrontation. This hadn't been about rules or property values. Patricia had been setting up a scheme to profit from a facility she didn't own, using HOA authority she didn't have, affecting people who trusted their board to act in their interests. Ted Morrison immediately filed a complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. The state opened an investigation into Patricia's conduct. Coastal Elite Properties claimed they'd been misled about the HOA's authority and withdrew from any future dealings. Patricia's brother-in-law resigned from his position with the company, and Patricia herself, facing potential fraud charges, quietly listed her Harborview property for sale in March. She moved out in April without saying goodbye to anyone. Marcus stood on his dock on a Saturday morning in late May, 8 months after that first citation had appeared on his garage door. The water was glass-calm, reflecting perfect blue sky. His boat sat in his assigned slip, freshly waxed and ready for the season. His brother and nephew were visiting again, the trip they'd missed back in September. This time there were no chains across the launch ramp, no permits required, no threats waiting. Just open water and family time. Marcus's nephew, 14-year-old Jake, walked down the dock carrying fishing rods. "Uncle Marcus, Mom says you saved this whole neighborhood. Is that true?" Marcus smiled. "I didn't save anything, Jake. I just reminded some people that rules work both ways. You can't demand others follow them if you're not willing to follow them yourself." He started the boat's engines, listening to their smooth rumble. Power isn't about control. It's about responsibility. Patricia forgot that. She thought being president meant she could do whatever she wanted. But real leadership means serving the community, not using it. Jake nodded thoughtfully. "So what happened to her? Did she go to jail?" "No jail," Marcus said, "but she lost her position, her reputation, and eventually her home here. Sometimes the consequences aren't legal. Sometimes they're just consequences. She made life difficult for people, and those people stopped wanting her around. That's how communities work." He backed the boat out of the slip, navigating carefully through the marina toward open water. His brother stood at the helm, grinning. "Still can't believe you own this whole marina and didn't tell anyone." "Didn't seem important," Marcus said. "I just wanted to launch my boat. The lease was just paperwork. It only mattered when someone tried to take that access away." He glanced back at Harborview Estates, at the neat row of houses lining the shore, at the community dock where 3 other residents were preparing their boats for the day. Everything was peaceful again, the way it should have been all along. Marcus Donovan had learned something valuable over those 3 months of harassment and confrontation. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom or a police report or formal complaints. Sometimes it comes from doing your homework, knowing your rights, and refusing to be bullied by people who mistake authority for power. Patricia had thought she was untouchable because she had a title. But titles are just words. Real power comes from legitimacy, from actually having the legal and moral ground to stand on. Patricia had neither. And as Marcus steered his boat toward the barrier islands, the morning sun warm on his face and his family beside him, he smiled. Because justice, whether delivered in a courtroom or a community meeting, was equally satisfying. Across the country in Sedona, Arizona, retired federal judge Diana Ortiz was trimming roses in her front yard when her HOA treasurer approached with a clipboard and a concerned expression. The woman informed Diana that the board was implementing mandatory property compliance inspections with a $200 fee per visit, scheduled quarterly. Diana set down her pruning shears, removed her gardening gloves, and smiled the same smile that had once preceded landmark legal rulings from the bench. "I'd like to see the legal authority for that fee structure," she said quietly. "And while you're researching it, you might want to review the 2019 Arizona HOA reform statute I helped draft. Section 30.31242 specifically prohibits arbitrary inspection fees without owner consent." The treasurer's face went white. Diana returned to her roses, "But that's a story for another time."